Welcome back to the Build for Life conference. As you might have noticed, each morning I go to London to Marcus Fairs. Hello, Marcus.
Hi, Anna.
How are you?
Let's have our breakfast chit-chat again.
Yes, we're having a breakfast chit-chat. How's the weather in London?
We're having a very nice autumn, actually. The trees are ablaze with colour. It's not too cold, it's not too windy. It's not that sunny, but it's London, so we're not complaining.
Sounds like Copenhagen. And I'm looking forward to your talk today. Are you ready?
Yes, of course we're ready. We'd be in trouble if we weren't. Today we're going to discuss how we can build more sustainably. How can the techniques we use to construct buildings make the buildings themselves more sustainable, as well as the lifestyles of the people who live in those buildings, and as well as helping the environment. And to discuss this topic, I have Susanne Brorson and Kasper Guldager, who are both architects, as well as James Drinkwater of the Laudes Foundation. First of all, Suzanne, hi to you. Suzanne, can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
I can't hear you very well, Suzanne. Can you just confirm that you can hear me?
Sorry, yes. Is it better now?
Yeah, it's better now. I can't see you, but don't worry, we'll carry on chatting. Ah, there you are. Suzanne, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Yes, my name is Susanne Brorson. I'm the founder of Studio Susanne Brorson. I'm an architect, and I have an architectural practice on the island of Rügen in Bergen and also in Berlin. I'm also a researcher at the Technical University in Berlin with a focus on climate responsive architecture in the Baltic Sea region, and I'm currently guest professor in Riga at the Riga University.
Okay, I'm finding it very difficult to hear you, actually. I kind of got the drift of most of it, but maybe whilst I speak to the other people, we can try and sort out the audio. I'm going to go to Casper now. Hi there, Casper.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for the invitation. Can you hear me? And how's the sound?
I can hear you, yeah. A little bit quiet. But Casper, tell us a little bit about yourself as well. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Yes, as you said, I'm an architect by training, but most of my life I've tried to kind of deviate from the classical architectural track. I did for 15 years run an innovation company within 3XN Architects, trying to promote innovation and research to practice within sustainability. So I'm deeply fascinated with sustainability and materials. And recently I jumped to the dark side and became a developer. So now I'm a co-founder of Home.Earth. And we do ethical development, both with a social and environmental pledge. And I'll be sharing some thoughts on that as well.
Okay, great to meet you. And finally, James, same question to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Hi, fantastic to be with you. So James Drinkwater, I'm calling in from Amsterdam, where I represent the built environment team at the Laudes Foundation. We're a private philanthropic foundation, so architects of another type, creating ecosystems of actors across the private sector, across policymakers, finance, and of course broader society to help achieve transformational shifts. And we're tackling climate change and inequality as a dual crisis, really two sides of the same coin. Great to be here.
Welcome to all of you. I must admit, I'm having trouble hearing you very well, but I think we're just going to carry on and go for it. You've all prepared a little presentation about the work you do and how it relates to the topic we're discussing. So, Suzanne, do you want to go first? If you could share your screen and give us your presentation.
Sure. Can you see it?
I can see you now, yeah. Hi.
Okay, super. Yeah, just a very quick introduction. I'm the founder of Studio Susanne Brorson, an architectural practice based on the Baltic island of Rügen, not far from Copenhagen actually, with another base in Berlin. The reason why I'm showing the location of our office in the context of the Baltic Sea region is that, sorry, I cannot for some reason move forward.
Now I can see your images, yeah.
That we have a very particular focus, which is the region that we're working in. It's the starting point for our idea what sustainable design should be like, buildings of high architectural quality, rooted in the place and able to respond to very particular climate and environmental conditions. For many years, I've been looking into the topic of climate-responsive architecture in the Baltic Sea region in particular, and for that I've carried out extensive research on vernacular buildings in the area. I'm interested in how local climate and environment has influenced the morphology of several building residential typologies in identifying simple design and construction principles that are still valid and that could be applied today. Yes, and I'm also trying to bring this sort of next generation of architects closer to this idea of specific solutions for certain climates and environments. I'm currently guest professor at University in Riga, and this semester we're looking into ideas for cohabitation as part of a design studio on new housing in Riga. I'm also very much trying to practice what I preach. This is one small project, one of the first projects on the island of Rügen as well. It's a conversion of an existing residential building, which is a so-called series or type buildings that was developed and built in very large amounts pretty much everywhere in former East Germany, so from north to south everywhere. We've added a long wall and a new terrace in between the two existing buildings to form a wind-protected courtyard space that creates a microclimate. This project sort of acknowledges the large potential in this extensive existing building stock and is an example of how it could be reused and brought into another life cycle. Yeah, and on a much more urban scale, we have taken part in a competition this year together with some officers from Sweden and Denmark. And it's actually a big urban space in the center of Berlin, and the question was how this could be redesigned to meet challenges connected with climate change. And in this case, Berlin in a couple of years will face a climate similar to what Sevilla in Spain is now. So we've proposed a dense forest that can hold a lot of public functions. And yeah, for this project, also on the island of Rügen, we've reinterpreted the local development plan and also traditional farmstead layouts from the area. And we have developed 3 different building typologies that enable a modular approach to design, to optimize planning and construction processes. And we have also produced a binding design guidance that states facade and other surface materials and gives lead details on simple build-ups for the construction of these prefabricated timber buildings. Also in order to ensure a high architectural design quality, which I actually think is the key to sustainable design. Thank you.
I'm having real trouble hearing the speakers. Is Casper there?
I also had a fallout in the sound, but I'm here. I hear you loud and clear.
I can hear you now, Casper. Yes. Phew. Okay. Can you take it away,
good.
please?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Well, my short talk today is a bit about what I think is the most important driver and way to talk about sustainability today. As said, I recently co-founded Home.Earth, and we do homes that are people and planet positive. And we founded Home.Earth to show a new way forward. We are a group of 19 founders with a wide range of experience, but also with a shared passion for the built environment. And we love what cities and buildings, communities do for us and how they affect our lives very positively. Also, we then acknowledge that there are matters that the built environment really needs to react to and address. Like we have this dual focuses on social inequality. Like today we see that real estate are separating people people that can and people that cannot afford. And we see that real estate is driving climate change, and our planet cannot sustain the way we build. This is, of course, the backside and what actually has driven us to take action to try and be a new developer in the real estate market. On inequality, I mean, this is Copenhagen. It's a heat map, not of temperature, but of the rise of apartment value since '92. It has risen with 667%, leaving a large portion of people out of ability to actually own or live in the city. What we do on the environmental part of it is trying to address that. I had personally 3 major chapters in my practice. Was practicing cradle to cradle, inspired by nature, how we can learn from nature to eliminate waste by thinking about ecosystems. Like waste is a word you don't find in nature. Can we in the industry, in the mankind ecosystem, develop learnings that can eliminate waste? Then I moved on to circular economy and put that into construction. And I think the circular economy really is trying to make a business focus. Like, what is the value of doing sustainable practice? And how can you redesign the way you work and the way you also finance construction? The last chapter is what I will spend my few minutes on today, is the donut economics, which is, you can say, a new model that has this dual focus as we do, with an inner social foundation that we cannot develop buildings if we don't do it in a social ethical way. And also the outer ring, like the planetary boundaries. We need to understand what are the real thresholds for the planetary boundaries. What are the effects and how is our space to operate when we have to respect that? So in short, with Cradle to Cradle, I developed ways to actually measure this. And with the circular economy, it's not just about recycling, it's about focusing on value, that we actually want our buildings to become material banks, that we can remanufacture their parts or even reuse them, or just make smart and flexible buildings that are easy to maintain. The donut for construction is really talking about creating a full transparency on carbon, on impact. And on the top, we have a normal kind of life cycle analysis. On the lower part, we have what's called absolute environmental sustainable assessment, where we actually say what are the limits for the planet and how can we stay within those, which is a far more ambitious target than what we have today in Denmark, at least. So the question that we're asking ourselves is, what if every single building made the world a better place? So inspired by the Kate Raworth donut economics, we have developed and are on a journey on finding a way to take those kind of global planetary goals and make them relevant to the industry, and also able to practice them per square meter. Like, what is the footprint? What is a kind of what is a limit to the resources, to the climate, to the biodiversity? And at the same time, when you look at the inner of the right circle, to create affordable, healthy, livable and inclusive communities. This is our first project we are currently conducting in the outskirts of Copenhagen, where we bought a plot that has an obligation to create retail and community in the base floor, which perfectly suits our ambition. We want to have residential and community hand in hand. In this, we have 3 major promises on the environmental part. We want to build climate positive, meaning that at the end of the day, we should prepare documentation so we actually account for the impact of our building, and how we, within that impact, stay within the planetary boundaries. So it actually becomes true sustainability. I think maybe that's the only thing I really want to take out of this input, is that sustainability, it shouldn't be a kind of a subjective matter. It shouldn't be about how you interpret it. It should be how it relates to the planetary boundaries. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. On top of that, we want to increase the biodiversity, and we want to build buildings so they are potentially bits and parts for future constructions. So everything is designed to be reused, to become flexible and a part of a circular economy. Beyond that, tons of things that I can't go into, but things that are supporting the environmental and the social dual focus we have. So that's my input for today. Look forward for the discussion.
Thank you very much. And thankfully now the audio has been sorted, so I was able to hear most of your talk there, Casper. This concept of donut economics, it's interesting that you've applied that to architecture, but could you, for anyone who's not familiar with the term, can you explain what donut economics are, and then we can talk about how that relates to the built environment?
Yeah, sure. I think what's interesting is that it builds on science. The Stockholm Resilience Center is a group of 250 scientists in Stockholm that over the past 10 years have put limits to what the planet can live up to, what it takes for the planet to be in balance, what it can regenerate. So we know this by Earth Overshoot Day, when we actually are using more resources than the Earth can obtain and regenerate. So it's actually putting that number into practice. That's outside of the donut. And then the hole in the middle is kind of, we can only construct and be on the planet if we do it in a social, you can say like fair way. So it's also putting limits to how we adapt to social environment performance.
And there are so many different buzzwords floating around at the moment. We've got donut economics, circular economy, cradle to cradle, regenerative architecture, reversible architecture, and then of course on top of that the kind of carbon agenda and the push towards net zero construction. Are they all the same thing? Do they relate to each other? Can you achieve all of those things at the same time, or do you have to choose which buttons am I going to press with this project?
I think they are connected. To me, at least, they are very strongly. I also wanted to try and underline that connection in the input I gave. Cradle to cradle is really about having the right mindset. It's about redesigning the way we make things in order for things not to become waste. Circular economy is trying to find the business models in that. And the donut economics are putting the right limit values in order to measure it. So to me, it's a perfect kind of evolution of how to talk about what I call absolute sustainability. So not relative sustainability, but absolute sustainability.
And obviously, your architecture, your practice is dedicated to getting all of this right. But what would your advice be to people who are doing more traditional architecture, more extractive architecture that actually does damage the planet and maybe doesn't give people the best lifestyle when they're living in the buildings? How can they start to move towards the kind of stuff you're talking about?
Well, I think we are in the same boat, because we are also, as a developer, I mean, we're engaging with many architects in order to carry out our projects. And it's about creating a baseline, finding out what do you measure and how do you measure. And the what is really about talking about carbon, I would say, is the easiest currency when you need to go in this direction. And how you do that is currently through a life cycle analysis. So you need to work with materials that are documented through certifications or EPDs. So it's really just to create an informed level of decision making, and then also, of course, setting a target that you want to be able to have this transparency, and you want to be able to take those informed choices. I mean, I did do a project that were carried out with a promise of 90% of all the materials should be able to be reused at a high value in the future. And it was a social housing scheme, so it was done with a low square meter price. So it is possible today. We just need to know what we ask in the beginning, and also how to measure it.
And final question for you for now. In where the area you live, are there regulations that are helping you achieve these things, or do you feel like you're constantly fighting the government and fighting the authorities in order to achieve these goals?
There's a bit of fight, because I mean we want to set higher targets at what currently is mandatory, but I also see a development, a positive development. I mean, at the EU level, we have the levels, which is a new way to actually document sustainability. We are complying to that, and we actually find a great inspiration in that, and that affects all member states of the EU. And in Denmark, we have a voluntary sustainability class that makes you go beyond the mandatory targets. And also we have a strong movement on sustainable building certifications. So I think one final thing is that we shouldn't forget, I mean, often sustainability becomes very technical. And I think the Velux focus with the compass, it has to be about people and something that you experience as well. So it cannot only be technical, you also need to remember the quality for the people with the indoor comfort, with the nature. So I think let's not forget that becoming really technical and just talking about numbers.
Thank you very much, Casper. Just a quick message to Suzanne. Suzanne, I'm going to ask you if you could do your presentation again after James, if that's okay, because I think it's only fair that I get a chance to hear that. We'll go to James first, but hopefully they can fix the audio so I can go back to you after James. I wanted to flag that to you now so it doesn't come as a surprise when I ask you later. And I actually can hear you much better now, which is great. I'll come back to you in a second. Okay, James, over to you then. Could you share your screen with us and give us your presentation, please?
Fantastic. I'm told in the background, magically Built by Nature will appear on your screen, and there it is. And fantastic to hear our last speaker, who I think is questioning some of the root causes of some of our issues in the built environment, looking at what we really need and the best way to do things. And I think we need to build from that point. But I'm here to talk about a new network and fund that the Laudes Foundation has just launched, Built by Nature, which is really encompassing this theme of how do we move to beyond extractive to regenerative in our built environment. For me, there's been a really big wake-up call, because we've been advocating the built environment represents nearly 40% of all carbon emissions. So it's a big part of the opportunity for climate mitigation. But the science demands we don't just reduce emissions, we've got to remove a hell of a lot of this stuff from the atmosphere. And arguably, if we've created 40% of the climate issue, we really now need to work with nature, which is our strongest tool, to get on that negative emissions track. We know the science says that forests offer our best hope. And so we've started in the work that we're funding at the Laudes strategy to really join a strategy that sits across forests and buildings and responds to the needs of forest communities. I've just come from COP26, spent the week discussing with forest communities who are saying, we know how to manage these beautiful resources, the best way for biodiversity and climate. We're desperate for clients who want our wood, who want to procure things that will provide us with the economic means to properly look after these important resources. And I can see that the slides perhaps aren't moving on. So if we just move the slide to the next slide. Again, this is this idea that we've started to really try to accelerate Built by Nature, and the slides aren't moving on, but there we go, around the need to accelerate the right kind of timber construction. We're starting to see, particularly strong in the Nordics, that the sector's starting to look to substituting high carbon materials like steel, cement with timber. But it's not taking this broader view of actually what does timber beyond business as usual mean to get this right for forests and climate smart forest economies, so that when we're sourcing timber, we're making sure we're improving the sequestration capacity of forests. As a sector procuring from those forests, we're doing that in the right way and creating those demand incentives to drive reforestation. And that carbon storage piece, we've just heard from our friend about the need to embrace a circular economy. But as those trees sequester carbon during their life, and then we start to put them into our buildings and our cities, it's really critical that we're storing that carbon safely for a very long time. So our average building life of 42 years is nowhere near enough, and we need to be designing these buildings and timber beams and whatnot for their second and third life here. But we've really optimized the whole of this industry for the wonder materials of the Industrial Revolution. So the way that regulations, the way the design and build process works, all the knowledge in the sector is not optimized around timber and bio-based materials, natural materials. It's really optimized for again, these materials that went through their own industrial revolution some time ago. So we need this demand stimulus. And as we start to build more with natural materials in timber and bio-based, it's not just about just endlessly building more meters squared. It's about looking at what the North Star needs to be to really optimize across that sequestration piece. So really looking at the forests and how we build with and for forests. It's looking at that carbon storage piece. Are we safely storing the carbon that's then locked up in these materials for many generations? And it's about that substitution effect. What are the right mix of materials for our buildings here? So we've started a movement through Built by Nature that's working with some of the innovators across Europe and then hopefully the world, who started to already look beyond the day-to-day of how we deal with low carbon in the sector towards this more regenerative focus. And we've looked at the actors who can both really drive demand for this new kind of building, but also with whom we need to work most closely to create the right safeguards for nature, to, again, raise the bar on sourcing, make sure FSC is everywhere, but even go beyond that to say, actually, how do we source as we aggregate demand through developers and cities for timber and bio-based housing? How do we do that in ways that over the coming decades drives the right kind of forest and woodland and the right kind of biodiversity there? So we're working with these big six stakeholders to drive demand, but really ensure that we're thinking all the way through to the forest as we do this. And Built by Nature as an organization, it's really a network that's there to connect those front runners, those kind of real visionaries of the regenerative building movement. It's there to enable them, so getting the research, know-how out there about the right ways to do this, looking more holistically across that carbon cycle and overcoming some of the regulatory barriers that are built into our systems. And it's amplifying what's possible because, you know, there's a classic story in England, the three little pigs. The first made its house of straw, and that natural material was terrible. You know, there's a need to change perceptions, to show what's possible and to amplify those narratives. And indeed, you can do this today. And the accelerator fund that has been set up by Built by Nature is there to enable teams to be built who can build real solutions that can scale in this regenerative building space. So we're delighted to be working with a real range of some of the best partner organizations out there, from the Bauhaus who've inspired the European Bauhaus movement, to the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance and Climate Kick, deeply working with cities to start to scale these new techniques. Some of the best researchers at the University of Cambridge, and our friends in the Cities for Forests platform, which is bringing together faraway forests and cities, showing that if we procure wood the right way, it doesn't just cut down trees. Actually, this is what forest communities need to be able to sustainably manage their land. It can be a driver over the coming decades for reforestation. A fantastic range of front runners, from giants, the Lend-Leases and Arups of the world, to startups have joined us in this movement to really shift and raise the bar. And we're building through Built by Nature strong national networks of those big six front runners and broader communities, bringing those forest networks, the environmental NGOs, policymakers, and so on, really together into an unstoppable movement, really raising the bar on how do you do this and how do we innovate to consistently improve this as a climate solution, and making everything real. From demonstrations to actually working with cities like my now home city of Amsterdam. They want to do 20% of all housing in timber and bio-based materials as part of their circular economy strategy. But the how has yet to become clear. So working with all these industry, political research and other players to really chart a clear pathway to starting to change the nature of the way we build cities and connect those back to forest. Again, a lot of the work will have to focus on removing those regulatory barriers we face today and strategic communications, because changing perceptions and changing that narrative, helping people understand that actually carbon removal is a job for our built environment. These involve a kind of a switch of the current dominant narrative. Again, we're trying to enable this. So as a philanthropic funder, Built by Nature is set up with an accelerator fund that is there to really pool resources into this new revolution in the sector, start to build teams, start to seed fund the kind of solutions that can push things further, whether that's circular uses of timber, proper sourcing. It's looking at how do you scale the use of these in housing schemes in cities in Europe that don't adopt timber today, so that people don't have to always be the first. It's really about kind of setting a clear innovation pathway now to see these kind of regenerative buildings move from niche to norm. So that fund is there to give out grants, to build teams of brilliant researchers, brilliant front runner companies and others to really move this agenda forwards. And because we are all ecosystems, we are part of nature. This is very much the idea of this new organization, its fund and the ecosystem of partner organizations, of cities, of industry players that it's supporting. It's looking to bring that into a much more thriving, much more robust ecosystem that can flip things and really start us to move on a pathway towards more regenerative buildings now. So it's clear that we're focused on that aggregation of demand, but as we aggregate demand, it's very clear that we have to be incredibly careful about how we work with and for nature. So we're absolutely centering forests. What does a climate smart forest economy look like as we're starting to scale timber? Trying to be relentlessly practical. And of course, the future is a hybrid of all sorts of bio-based materials and hopefully clean steel and low carbon cement. All these things are needed at the table, but it's going to be a difficult journey to shift perceptions, provide the solutions we need, and we're there to focus on what's hard. So great to be here with such fantastic speakers. I'm sure there's fantastic people in the audience already moving this way, and Built by Nature, this new organization, is very much there to support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. A quick question for you. We often at Dezeen receive projects from architects who claim that because it's made of timber, it's therefore a zero carbon building, because you cut down the trees, you lock that carbon in the building. That seems to me a little bit simplistic, because first of all, how long is that carbon going to remain in the building? You mentioned that in your talk. And what about replacing those trees that were cut down in the first place? If you cut down a forest and just leave a desert, you haven't really done much for the environment. So what are the parameters like? What are the rules? What are the kind of things you need to look out for in order to be able to claim you've got a zero carbon building through the use of timber?
Sure, and that difficulty, some of the, we are trying to raise the bar here and challenge just the status quo. So, there are great sustainable forestry certifications, the FSCs and things out there that look at how do you properly manage a forest as you're sourcing from it? How do you ensure those replanting schemes? But let's look a bit further. If we start to shift towards a circular bioeconomy en masse, so we move all these fossil-based products to timber and bio-based products, we could overshoot the carrying capacity of nature in our forests. So it's really clear this isn't just about timber buildings in a silo. This is about a whole shift of the economy towards more regenerative behavior. And timber for use in construction is one of the best uses of that precious biomass that we can put it to in that transition to a net zero economy. That means we need to prioritize. We can't simply switch everything and kind of ask nature to provide us with all of the solutions. So we need to be very joined up across sectors. And I think that point around, if it's just made of timber, well, if the building's made of timber and then it's around for 40 years and it's decommissioned, we can't be very clear how that carbon is going to be stored in the second and third life, so that really it's locked in there for generations. The claim about this fantastic carbon storage technology, the oldest that's around, it fails. So that point that our previous speakers made around embracing the circular economy, really kind of designing for reuse, this is really, really critical as well. And as we're aggregating demand, again, it's not just enough to say, okay, well, we'll source using a certification. We've got to, as kind of groups of developers, cities, investors, and others, start to work very deeply to say, how are we creating the right economic incentives for this push on reforestation and proper management of biodiversity? This is going to require a kind of a coordination that goes beyond just single project here. So I think, whilst it is clear that versus the status quo, a switch to bio-based often is lower carbon, that's pretty provable. If we really want to scale this, we've got to raise the bar. And again, we use that 3S framework, the sequester, store, and substitute. Let's not just focus on that last bit, the carbon impact across the board. That's what's key.
Okay, thank you so much, James. Right, I'm going to go back to Suzanne now, and I've been asked if you could give a kind of quick recap of your talk, Suzanne, because apparently the audience were able to hear what you were saying, but I wasn't. So it's largely for my benefit, if that's okay. But if you could do like a quick run through. Your talk was quite quick anyway, so this shouldn't take too long. But I'd love to hear what you were presenting.
Super, but you can hear me now.
I can hear you now. It's not perfect, okay, but I can at least understand. At least it's English rather than Mars language.
Okay, yeah, just a quick introduction. I'm the founder of Studio Susanne Brorson, an architectural practice based on the Baltic island of Rügen and Bergen, and also with a branch in Berlin. The reason why I'm showing the location of our offices in the context of the Baltic Sea is that our work has a very particular focus, which is the region that we're working in. And it's the starting point for our idea what sustainable design should be like, buildings of high architectural quality, rooted in the place and able to respond to very particular climate and environmental conditions. For many years now, I've been looking into the topic of climate responsive architecture in the Baltic Sea region, and for that I've carried out actually extensive research on vernacular buildings in the area. I'm interested in how local climate and environment has influenced the morphology of several residential typologies and identifying simple and construction principles that are still valid and could be applied today. I'm also trying to bring this sort of next generation of architects closer to this idea of specific solutions for certain climates and environments, and I'm currently guest professor at Risepa University in Riga, and this semester, for example, we're looking into ideas for a new neighborhood, for cohabitation as part of a design studio on new housing in Riga. I'm also very much trying to practice what I preach with my studio. This is one small project, one of the first projects, also on the island. It's a conversion of an existing residential building, which is a so-called series or type building that was developed and built in large amounts pretty much everywhere in former East Germany. So it exists everywhere from north to south, and we have added, in this case, added a long wall and a new terrace in between the two existing buildings to form a wind-protected courtyard space that creates a microclimate. And this project acknowledges the large potential of this extensive building stock and is an example of how it could be reused and brought into another life. Another example on a very urban scale, we have participated in this competition this year and have become finalists. It's an existing urban space in the center of Berlin, close to the TV tower. And the question was how it could be redesigned to meet the challenges connected to climate change. And in this particular case, Berlin in a couple of years is facing a climate similar to what Sevilla in Spain is now. So we've proposed a dense forest that can hold a lot of public outdoor functions in it. And the last project is this eco-village. It's also on the island of Rügen, and we have reinterpreted a local development plan and also looked into traditional farmstead layouts in the area and have come up with a scheme that arranges several buildings into three-sided courtyards, and it's, in this case, also connecting to an existing village next to it. And we have developed 3 different building typologies that enable a modular approach in design to optimize planning and construction processes. We have produced a binding design guidance, actually, that states facade and other surface materials and gives lead details on the simple build-ups for the construction of these prefabricated timber buildings, and in order to ensure a very high architectural quality as well, which I actually think is the key to sustainable design. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad I got to hear what you were saying. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left, so I think I'd like to open it up now to a bit of a discussion. I'd like to ask all of you, I think it was you, James, that mentioned that you'd been at COP26, but we've just had this massive climate conference. What did all of you think with the outcome of COP26 was, and particularly in relationship to the built environment? Did it deliver enough? Did it deliver anything? Let me start with you, Suzanne, since you've just been speaking.
I think it is very important that these events take place. I haven't quite got my head around, I think, what it will actually mean, for example, for my work. I will see that. I think that calls have been out from the German Architects Chamber on rethinking building regulations and how we can deal, for example, with existing buildings and how we can reconstruct, reuse them and make it much easier to do so. So I think there's things coming out of that already, and I think that's very important.
Thank you very much. And James, you were there. What was it like? And did you come out of it with a sense of optimism or like a big depression?
You've got to be a stubborn optimist in this business, haven't you? I mean, I think, you know, listen, COP17 was about the first time buildings were ever on the agenda, and, you know, half the room were asleep. COP21 in Paris, the first ever buildings day, but it's sort of a little bit more energy efficiency, please, was the mantra. But I do have a sense of optimism because, you know, we heard mayors, we heard NGOs, we heard ministers, heads of companies saying we need to move to tackle whole life cycle carbon. So we're talking about the total climate impact of the sector, kind of bonkers that we weren't before. And we saw, you know, Pacific coasts in the US and the UK and Canada, Germany and others starting to say, in our public projects, we're going to start to assess the total carbon impact of our buildings. So, because we need everyone to do everything, it's never going to be enough. And that's ultimately why we need regulation, but we're starting to hear the right noises now. And I hope we do actually start to see a real kind of, you know, set of rocket boosters put on the agenda.
Thank you very much. And Casper, same question to you.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I weren't there, and I also think it's more than an arm length from you know, like an average person. What happens at the COP? I mean, it is a kind of a political beast, and I think there's a lot of frustration with the slowness of that beast. So I respect and also see the progress, but there needs to be a wake-up call because it's quite clear that science is saying that this is not going to be, you know, the course to steer if we want to have a stable world and stable societies. So I think it's so political that it makes me want to, like, as an individual, to take action. Like, what is my own consumption? What is my own contribution to a positive path? And also, I think we see that happening with a lot of private initiatives, like our own in the construction industry, but many other, like in everything that you connect to. I mean, you are starting to be able to take choice. I think maybe the biggest choice is that I see a lot of pension funds now start to offer, you know, like deep green investment possibilities. So I think we'll see a real big accelerating shift when it comes to consumerism and where people put their mouth, because that's what needs to change. The whole way we consume, the whole way we kind of construct, and it's not gonna change with the COP. I think it will change between the COPs, and that's at least what I'm hoping for. And also I see the possibilities are starting to emerge that you actually can act on it.
Thank you very much. Okay, next question to all of you is, I mean, James talked a lot about timber, but also there are all kinds of other natural materials out there. There are all kinds of other alternative materials out there. What to you do you think are the exciting possibilities, both in terms of materials that can be used to build buildings and the techniques that can be used to build buildings? What's around the corner, or what could help us lower the impact of our buildings? Suzanne, have you got any things that are on your radar that you have been using in your projects or would like to be using, or even things that have not been developed yet but look promising for the future?
Yes, of course. I think there's a lot of very interesting things happening. I would like to add to one comment that Kasper made before. I think it is very interesting that there is regulations, but I have had the experience that it's very much clients who come in and are much more willing to look into more radical approaches, who want to build very, very sustainable and even much more sustainable than current regulations are asking for. So I have the feeling that even from a client side, there's lots of things on the move, and I find that very exciting. And it's also these clients who come with a lot of products, and there's a lot of information available on the internet, and they're doing research themselves and find out about things like, could we not do like a combination of straw, hay, clay, this and that, and I think it's very exciting that we are maybe there's a moment now where we can start to experiment with things. Of course, I think that there's a little bit of a risk, of course, and maybe we need to be willing to take that risk to test what could be done, and we will learn from that. Maybe some things don't work. Maybe we have to combine it with established systems. But I'm quite. I think that there's a lot of things happening now, and I'm personally trying to. I'm working a little bit with local nature materials and trying to come up with some facade systems. So that's what I'm experimenting with myself. Yeah, I think there's a lot going on.
And it's interesting that you said that clients can help you get there. Lots of architects I speak to say, well, clients are the problem, actually, that they don't want to take risks, they don't want to innovate. They like the idea of being sustainable, but not if it damages their profits. Do you not find that? And who are these clients? Because I think a lot of the audience would like to know who they are.
I think that there's, maybe in this particular place, it's a tourist region, and some of the project developers have found out that when people go on holiday, there's a certain market demand that people would like to stay in a good building, in a sustainable place, and that is actually for them something they can, which is something they can promote very much. And I have had 2 clients now who are specifically asking for, we need to do something very sustainable here. We want to have a car sharing scheme. We want to have this and this and that. And I think that there is a market that is happening there, and also clients who think that they can maybe build more simple, who don't want so much technical appliances, who want to think that building has become too complicated, maybe even on the sort of private residential sector. And I think it's coming a little bit from that corner as well.
Sounds like you're very lucky where you live. Sounds like some kind of paradise. Same question to you, Casper. But apart from the fact that you have bad Wi-Fi there, so I can't really hear you that well. Apart from that, it sounds like a dream. Casper, same question to you. What are the materials and technologies and techniques that are emerging that will help us deliver the kind of buildings we've been talking about?
Yeah, no, I think we have a massive climate crisis, but also a housing crisis at scale. So we need a lot of homes, and we need to do that with respect for the earth. So I think we cannot invent kind of new materials. There's a lot of, myself been involved with upcycling and making new kind of mycelium-based building components, but we need to look at scaling the solutions. So I think as we heard, like the bio-based path is really an important one, but we need to find one at scale, and also we need buildings that can last. And we us as a developer, we are that client that we mentioned, but we are, of course, taking care of investments from our investors. So we need to document the kind of the safety of that investment. So we can't just do one big experiment, but it's my learning from commercial, industrial available materials. We can make buildings that we can take apart and reuse over and over. We can drive down carbon. We need that kind of perspective on it. We need that transparency, so we can make the right choices. We will still have steel. We will still have concrete. I think we need a shift towards much more bio-based and look for the scalable solution, not just reinventing or inventing new things because the solutions are out there. It's just important that we know that it's a industry that requires a lot of approvals, a lot of verifications. So I'm more looking to what's out there and how we can scale that up and how we can have carbon transparency on it.
Thank you very much. The same question to you, James. I'd like to hear as well. I mean, cutting down a tree, slicing it up, and building a house out of it is kind of an ancient way of doing things, isn't it? It's sustainable. But are there new timber technologies in the offing? I mean, so much of a tree gets wasted, doesn't it, when you convert it from a growing tree into a few planks? I mean, I've heard that 3/4 of the tree ends up being wasted. So are there technologies that are making forestry more efficient and timber being more high-tech, for example?
Sure, it's a great call out. And the last point around, we really need to scale mass timber. Mass timber to many, I think, is still a new technology. The idea of engineered timber, and it's not this rickety 18th century stuff that burns. It's, Dr. Michael Ramage and his colleagues at the University of Cambridge have showed in concept how you could do, as much as 80 stories in mass timber. We're still getting there, and I think you're right to call out that point around efficiency. We're working with groups in Switzerland who are working on exactly that same question. How do you make sure we use 100% of the tree? Some of that for kind of structural use in mass timber, some of that for other uses in kind of composite bio-based materials and so on. And I think that efficiency is really key to the climate story here. Again, groups in Spain we're working with are looking at that digital technology that can track how you're harvesting the right trees at just the right time in their life cycle, where they've kind of stopped sequestering as much carbon, turning those into timber, being hyper efficient, and ensuring, as our colleague was saying, you're starting to tag those assets so that they can be reused beyond their initial life in the first building they go into. So we need to pair, the brilliance of new technologies with some of the oldest technologies we've got. As you said, construction's been around for a while, but certainly modern mass engineered timber construction. This is what's really brought it into the 21st century.
Thank you, James. There's a lot of audience questions for you, but just to make it fair to the other panelists, I'm only going to ask you one of them. Lothian asks, in the next 30 years, more than 1 billion people in Africa will need a house. Is all the timber in the world enough for that demand of material? And I guess we can broaden it beyond Africa. Is there enough wood to do all of the construction that we need it to do? And is there enough will to also replant all those trees?
I think it's a really
Is there enough land as well?
Sure. I mean, I think competition for land, right? Unless we change the way we do agriculture, unless we look at really the need of how much we're building, we'll overshoot. That's really key. So we have to be addressing some of these root causes. And whilst I'm not personally an expert in African forestry, I don't think in Built by Nature we're saying we need to switch from what we do today, which is pretty climate negative, as it were, to all timber. There's going to be a hybrid of solutions that are needed. There's fantastic, African construction, rammed earth, that's often a more sustainable in certain areas solution. So it's not always about timber, but in those areas where actually that long-term demand for a higher value use of wood that's longer life, it stores carbon for longer, can help provide forest communities with a livelihood and drive reforestation over the coming decades. It's that analysis we need. Looking at, again, land use competition for it and where that housing demand is going to come from. So there's no silver bullet solutions. We're not saying that timber's that.
Okay, great. And I think we've got time for one quick question. Anonymous asks and says, great presentations, everybody. So thank you very much, Anonymous, for the feedback. Do we need to change the shapes and forms and designs and scales of the architecture we do in order to be able to build in harmony with nature? Casper, can you respond to that quickly, like in 20 seconds?
Yeah, I think we need to look way more industrialized towards buildings as products. We need to have products that are able to have many lifetimes and many uses. So a real kind of industrialized way to scale this up. So we build with components that are standards, and then be smart with those standards through design and architecture. But build buildings so they are like material inventories for future buildings.
Thank you very much. And Suzanne, do you have an equally short answer to that question? Does the nature of architecture need to change?
I think that there is always a sort of need to look into, that's what I think, into specific challenges in one place. I think there won't be a generic solution to new housing or new timber buildings or how it's done, but maybe I think that there is a thing certainly about optimizing and simplifying things so more people can benefit from that. I think that's a very interesting approach. I think that we can establish maybe a system how a building can work, and then this system is maybe a bit elastic, so we can make it match to several places and extend it and so forth. I think that's quite interesting.
Thank you very much. And I think we all need to come and live on your island. I think that would be a better world for everybody if there's enough room for us. Thank you very much, everybody. Handing back to you now, Anna. I hope you can hear me okay.
Thank you, Marcus. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah. Thank you very much. It's been great working with you. I'm going to miss you as my breakfast conversation each day. Thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this amazing conference.
You're very welcome, Marcus, and I'm also going to miss our little morning chit-chat between London and Copenhagen. But fantastic talk you had, and I hope to see you or talk to you again another day.
Thank you very much. See you again. Bye.
Bye.